Let me be. Like a one-armed boomerang, it's a Valentine's Day poem too. Like a one-armed boomerang whistling through a typhoon's eye, a steamship's blind plow through miles of coal black, star-flecked sea. Like the swollen river's stubborn chew through tons of stone, cars and trees, tiny floating buoys on my shoulders. Time enough and everything worn to silty dust. I'm a goddamn krill-bearded blue whale howling a deep-sea love scream. You see, I'm a spaceship singing through a star-stinging heat shroud. It's fire gown, my heart so fat and hot. Every passing thing joy singed with this overripe, honey-stuffed juggernaut sweetness. Let me be back to your sunlight-lined lips, your muscled hands, your morning eyes first opening. Let me be a glint of sun dust drifting down your windpipes glisten, lodging in your red, wet, blood pumped, silken clench that ruby smooth muscles every move. Let me be. Let me be. Thank you. This is another love poem. And this is a love poem for someone who's gone. Don Belton, who knows that name still? Okay. So Don Belton is a writer, was a writer and a teacher. He taught here for a couple years. And just this really incredibly important person in the world of literature for sure. But he's also, you know, if you knew him, you knew he was delightful and a pain in the ass and like, but he was this dear friend to me. Don was killed in 2009, I think. But he was a dear friend to me. He was also a dear mentor, and he was the kind of guy. So Don was probably 20 years older than me, and I remember at some point he was telling this story. He grew up in Newark, and he referenced the riots, you know, the riots in Newark and the riots in the cities. As these sort of like turning points, and that was before I was born, so I didn't quite have this sort of historical sense. And he would often reference the riots, and he was growing up in between Newark and Philly around the time of the riots. And he said, yeah, you know, me and my buddy had a club called IN, Interested Negroes. Interested Negroes. He's like, you know, we were like these kids who like did stuff, and we like, you know, we went to like mock UN or whatever, you know. Smart kids do, I'm not sure. And I was like, oh, neat. Was it like a joke? And he said, no, Russ, we were being serious, so you could make a joke about it. I said ironic. Were you being ironic? He said, no, we were being serious, so you could be ironic. Which is true. He was like making a space. So anyway, this is a poem for someone who actually, I didn't even know, but he was making a space for us, you know. And a lot of us don't even know he was making space for us. Spoon. Who sits like this on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m, turning over and over the small silent body in his hands with his eyes closed, fingering the ornate tendrils of ivy cast delicately into the spoon that came home with me 8 months ago from a potluck next door, during which the birthday boy, so lush on smoke and drink and cake, made like a baby, and slept on the floor with his thumb in his mouth until he stumbled through my garden to my house the next morning, where I was frying up stovetop sweet potato biscuits and making himself at home, as was his way. After sampling one of my bricks, told me I could add some baking powder to his, and could I put on some coffee and turn up the Nina Simone and rub maybe his feet, which I did. The baking powder, stirring it in. And I like to think, unlikely though it is, those were the finest biscuits Don ever ate. For there was organic coconut oil and syrup bought from a hollering man at the market who wears a rainbow cap and dances to disguise his sorrow. And it might be a ridiculous wish, but the sweet potatoes came from a colony just beyond my back door, smothering with their vines the grass and doing their part to make my yard look ragged and wild to untrained eyes. The kale and chard so rampant, some stalks unbeknownst drooped into the straw mulch, and the cherry tomatoes shone like ornaments on a drunken Christmas tree, and the blackberry vines gnawed through their rusty half-assed trellis. This in Indiana, where I am really not from, where for years Negroes weren't even allowed entry, and where the rest stop graffiti might confirm the endurance of such sentiments. And when I worried about this to Don on a cool September evening, worried it might look, Don, in his kindness, abundant and floral, knowing my anxiety before I stated it, having been around, having gone antiquing in Martinsville a few weeks back, and been addressed most unkindly by a passing truck or two, trucks likely adorned with the stars and bars, knowing the typhoon's race makes our minds do, twirling with one hand a dreadlock and patting my back with the other, asked, smiling sadly and knowingly, niggerish? Before saying, it looks beautiful, and returning to some rumination on the garden boy of his dreams, whose shorts were very short and stomach taut and oily enough to see his reflection in. Don told me this as we walked arm in arm through our small neighborhood, which he asked me if he could do. Is this okay? He asked, knowing mostly how dense and sharp the dumb fear of mostly straight boys can be. Oh, Don. Walking arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, his hand almost patting my forearm, resting there, down the small alley next to the graveyard, fall beginning to shudder into the leaves. And Don once dreamt he was in that graveyard next to his house on 4th Street, where in real life we sang Diana Ross's Missing You while decorating his kitchen, where I once asked to borrow a signed Jamaica Kincaid novel at which Don made one sound by sucking his teeth that indicated I was both impossibly stupid and a little bit cute. And in the dream, in the graveyard where century-old oak trees look like giants trudging into a stiff wind, and some gravestones are old enough to be illegible and lean back as though consulting the sun, Don was floating into the air, which, pleasant at first, became terrifying. He told me, beginning to cry, just a little, as the world beneath him grew smaller and smaller, his house becoming a toy, the trees huge limbs like the arms now of small people calling him down, but he couldn't stop going higher, he said, crying, just a little. And I have inserted myself 2 or 3 times into the dream, imagining a rope cinched to his waist by which Don might be tethered to this world, snatching it as it whips, uncoiling through the grass at my feet, and gripping it with all my strength until it almost hauls me up and takes the skin of my palms with it, twisting slowly into the sky, at which I become like the trees here on earth, shouting, come back, come back. Running some blocks, looking into the sky. First down 4th, but as the wind sends him this way and that, I too veer through backyards, hopping a fence or two, not wanting to take my eyes from him, not wanting to lose him, as he sails in and out of the low clouds, looking down with his sad eyes, just as he did when he said at breakfast, I'm a survivor. I survived. This 53-year-old gay black man, to which we did a little dance, listing the myriad bullets he dodged, swirling the biscuits in their oily syrup. Don occasionally poking his fork into the air for emphasis, laughing and sipping coffee and shaking our heads like we couldn't believe it. And having survived, Don wanted a child to love, and we made plans that I might make the baby with my sweetie, and he could be the real dad. Reading and cooking and worrying while I played in the garden and my sweetheart made the dough, which maybe would have worked, though Don never once cleaned a dish. And when I told him to put his goddamn plate in the sink, he writhed in his seat and called me bitch before plopping it in. returning to his Destiny's Child tune about survival, while he scooped and slurped the remaining batter with this spoon in my hands, into which I stare, seeing none of this. I swore when I got into this poem I would convert this sorrow into some kind of honey with the little musics I can sometimes make with these scribbled artifacts of our desolation. I can't even make a metaphor of my reflection upside down and barely visible in the spoon. I wish one single thing made sense. To which I say, oh, get over yourself. That's not the point. After Don was murdered, I dreamt of him, hugging him and saying, you have to go now. Fixing his scarf and pulling his wool overcoat snug, weeping and tugging down his furry Russian cap to protect his ears, kissing his eyes and cheeks again and again. You have to go, cinching his coat tight by the lapels, for which Don peered at me again with those sad eyes, or through me, or into me, the way my dead do sometimes, looking straight into their homes, which hopefully have flowers in a vase on a big wooden table, and a comfortable chair or two, and huge windows through which light pours to wash clean and make a touch less awful what forever otherwise will hurt. In the morning before they had to leave, and she was like crying quietly, eating her French toast and like crying. And I almost just started crying because I was like, oh, is he crying because he misses her Uncle Rossi? Well, she had this friend, this butterfly, that she had been hanging out with the whole day. And she couldn't find her friend. I mean, I'm sure she was a little bit sad. It's called weeping. Weeping. I'm thinking here of the Proto-Indo-European root, which means the precise sound of a flower bud unwrapping, and the tiny racket a seed makes cracking open in the dark, which has evolved in a handful of Latinate languages to mean the sound of lovers. You know I'm bullshitting, right? Which has evolved in a handful of Latinate languages to mean the sound of lovers exiting each other, implying as well the space between them, which usage is seen first in Dante in the 14th century. Elbowing it for good into our mouths and minds, and of course the sweet bead of sugar imperceptibly moseying from the fig's tiny eye, precisely unlike sorrow, which the assembly of insects sipping there will tell you, when I tell you, my niece without fit or wail, knowing her friend Emma had left and not said goodbye, having spent the better part of the day resting on her finger, sometimes opening her wings, which were lustrous brown with gold spots, to steady herself at the child-made gale. Or when she was tossed into the air while my niece took her turn at pickup sticks until calling Emma by holding her finger in the air, to which Emma would wobble down. And Michaela said, "Deal us in," when we broke out the dominoes, at which they made a formidable duo, whispering to each other instruction. And while the adults babbled our various dooms, Michaela and Emma went into the bedroom where they sang and danced, and I think I heard Michaela reading Emma her favorite book. Both of them slapping their thighs, leaning into each other. And at bedtime, Michaela put on her PJs carefully. First the left arm through while Emma teetered on the right, then the other. And in the dark, Michaela whispered to Emma, who had threaded her many legs into the band of Michaela's sleeve, while she drifted, watching Emma's wings slowly open and close. And Emma must have flown away for good, judging from the not brutal silence at breakfast, as Michaela chewed the waffle goofily with her one front tooth gone, and weakly smiled, looking into the corners of the room for her friend, for Emma, who had left without saying goodbye, the tears easily rolling from her eyes, when I say she was weeping, when I say she wept. Been there forever. Thank you.